All right, so we're going to do another mini series on the Legion Strength and Conditioning podcast. This time, rather than being prescriptive and overbearing about how people should be coaching, we are going to take a slightly different turn and talk about our personal experience getting started with remote coaching and programming for athletes, right? Like actually writing programs and having people follow them and send in the results and all that stuff, which I think for each of us was a slightly different journey actually getting involved in this, but we've all been doing this for kind of a long time. And a lot of people ask us questions about like, hey, how do I get my own individual design clients? How did you get started with programming? And so we want to share that. And then in the future, we will return to some of our more prescriptive, overbearing tendencies and throw out some advice about how to potentially get clients and how to work with clients in the future. But for now, we're just going to explain where we came from, how we got started with remote coaching, and hopefully some people find this useful. So John, I want to know, why did people ask you to write training for them? Why would they?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty obvious, let's be honest. I'm a delight to work with. I have a warm, caring personality.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I started off pretty much kind of 2015, I think, was when I really got going with the remote coaching. And it actually started from a grid league that Todd and I worked with a few other people in Chicago trying to get a team for the Grid League. Those of you that don't know what Grid League is,
how could you not know what Grid League is?
Yeah, it was pretty short-lived.
It still goes on in Florida, by the way.
It does.
Yeah,
it's awful.
Yeah, there's a couple of small leagues around, but I think like combination of short races with CrossFit movements. Anyway, so we put together kind of a team for this, for an amateur competition they were doing as part of the main league. And we were trying to get a pro team at the time. But we kind of gathered athletes together in Chicago, sort of Chicagoland area. We pulled people in who are either just great CrossFit athletes or had specific skills based around that. And we kind of pulled them into team training sessions. We were doing a lot of work getting ready for this competition. And from there, I just kind of started working with a number of people that were on the team. People who we'd been coaching for, I guess 2 months maybe. I forget how long we prepped for, but
actually kind of like, so we put in like a good amount of work to that. I don't remember how long, but we legitimately just like had practices and made all these people get together all the time. It was kind of intense.
And the nice thing was everyone wanted to come to training and was like willing to work their schedules and stuff. Cause people traveled, like, some people were in the suburbs and had an hour trip into the city just to train. But,
even more, like Brandon was in Rockford, which is like 90 minutes plus away.
Yeah. But yeah, from there, I started working with maybe 3, 4, 5 people from that team. And I just kind of developed from there. So, I can look back at some of the programming I did or the way I coach people and see the mistakes and see what you'd expect from someone who's brand new to it in a sense. Obviously I'd been coaching a long time and I had a good amount of knowledge in the area, but it's kind of a different step up to dealing with people who want to be competitive or are coming from an experienced training background. And yeah, definitely a long kind of learning experience that goes with coaching. But that's where I initially started off. It was with people who were already good athletes, who had very specific goals, who I kind of somewhat saw in person, somewhat remotely. And then from there, just kind of built up a glowing reputation.
John, I know you're a modest fellow, but I think it's also important to note that like you were an individual regionals competitor in what, 2014?
2013. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, like it was not the, being an individual regionals competitor in 2010 or something was like, you could just kind of show up and be pretty good. But like you were actually, one of the best CrossFit athletes like in the Chicago area at the time too.
Yeah, I guess so. At the time,
see, like
probably
listen to how modest this man is, right? He can't admit it, but like he was really good.
Well, there is an element of imposter syndrome and that kind of thing. Anyway, I like to still joke about being a former regionals athlete, but it's very much tongue in cheek. And I went to regionals. I didn't have butterfly pull-ups. There's things like that where you look back and think the difference between now and then. But yeah, I've been around. I've done my time.
Yeah, right. I mean, and like to your point, right? It wasn't necessarily like the modern era of CrossFit where everyone who is going to semifinals this year, like would have literally won the CrossFit Games in 2010. Like it's not like, but it was still very competitive and difficult to qualify for regionals at the time. So, you're selling yourself a little bit short, I think.
Take the compliment. Thanks.
He can't do it. He can't do it. He can't take the compliment.
Todd, when did you go to regionals?
Well, I never went as an individual. I was on a team for a few years back around that same time. Yeah.
Did you have a team in 2014 or 2012?
I don't remember the years, to be honest.
Do you remember?
I think I was on a team. Yeah, it was okay. Yeah, it would have been actually 2012. 2012. Yeah. So I was on a team in 2011 and 2012. Yeah.
Okay. Because I was on a team in 2012. Because I was at Windy City that year.
Right, because that was the year with like the heavy dumbbell snatches.
Yep.
That people kind of couldn't do, and like the heavy hang power clean row pistol workout. Yeah.
John, did you do any? Did you compete at regionals? Were you at Central London in like, was it 2011 when it was in like Bolton?
Yeah. No, I that's a good story. I missed out by I think about 7 places of getting to regionals. But that was the year of the first Open, and the first workout they had issues with submission of scores, so they ran basically the first workout for 2 weeks, and that was my worst workout because it had double unders in, and I still wasn't good at double unders at the time. But I had a ski trip planned for like in between workouts 1 and 2. And I think I'd left and they announced that workout 1 was going to be, they had another week to submit, and I didn't take my jump rope with me skiing because that would be ridiculous. And I ended up in the pool in France, up in the mountains, after skiing all day, and I was doing like underwater double unders. So I was literally just like bouncing and just like doing my hands to try and get like more endurance for double unders for that whole week. And then I got back and did worse. So that was good. It's almost like a week of skiing and drinking wasn't useful.
The training methods.
I know.
The secret training methods.
Yeah.
Underwater double unders.
The secret Soviet training methods.
Yeah, that surprisingly didn't pay off.
Oh God.
But yeah, I mean, John, to sort of like circle back to your actual, story with getting started with coaching. I mean, you had a reputation as an athlete who was pretty good, right? And then we were involved in the situation where we're actually working in person with a bunch of other athletes who are pretty good. And I think from my perspective, a lot of those people obviously had a lot of like talent and ability in the sport, but a lot of them like surprisingly didn't know what they were doing, if that makes sense. Right. And that's like not to be like not to cast aspersions on them or anything, but it's like, oh, you've never really had anyone tell you what to do. You've never had anyone like critique your movement or like critique your pacing or just like give you helpful advice or anything. And so I think for a lot of those folks being in person with us and having you go up to them and be like, hey, like you should definitely do it this way instead of that way, that was like a huge value add for them. And they're like, oh, wow, like this guy like legitimately knows what he's doing. And like, I could probably be a lot better if I had someone just like telling me what to do as opposed to just like killing myself in the gym all the time. So,
yeah,
I think
I think that kind of time period was just at the point where people were starting to realize that they could get better by doing more than just a group class. That up until that point, there'd very much been you're just going to do the group classes. Maybe you'll do a little bit of extra skill work on something you're bad at, and that's fine. And that kind of, I feel like 2014, 2015 was kind of that tipping point to where I was like, oh, you can do your own program and you're going to get a lot better. You can have something that's tailored to your needs and get a lot better, which wasn't really much of a thing up until that point.
Yeah, I think at that time people were doing more than classes, but I think that people had just sort of like watched videos of like Miko and Rich training and were just doing whatever all the time, right? Yeah. They're like, oh, cool. Like I'll just jump in with the group class and then I'll just do 10 random workouts that I found.
Yeah. Yeah. They didn't have like a structure to that program necessarily.
Blog programs were pretty big around then as well, right? So you'd have, the infamous, was it Outlaw? It's like a catalyst cycle with like a .com workout from 2007.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of those blogs starting to emerge then.
Oh.
So I started in 2015 around a similar time. I think I was already programming for like my gym at the time. So I was living in Kuwait, a pretty good gym, and we were sort of quite lucky. I was quite lucky as a coach because so in Kuwait you have male only gyms and female only gyms, and you have some mixed gyms which tend to be some like high end personal training studio that's attached to like a hotel or something. And I worked at one of the male only gyms, and it was in Kuwait, sports it can be they are sort of growing to be quite a big thing socially. So people would come to the gym and they would train all the time, and they wanted to live like a competitor and do all that stuff. So I put together like a competitors program, which I never got any clients from, but I was already programming sort of more for competitive CrossFit. And then I remember I went to the Asia Regional in 2014 as an individual, and then I sort of came out of the back of that, and I just suppose got like a bit of a reputation for being a good CrossFitter as well in the area, which is helpful. But I was also like putting stuff up. I would say I was publicly more like interested in coaching than a lot of other people. Like I was putting Instagram posts up in 2014 on like do glute banded walks before you squat for glute activation and all this type of stuff. Not that, like they are horrendous in terms of content and all this type of thing, but I was sort of doing a lot of that type of stuff when everyone was sort of just still taking pictures of their food, and that type of thing. So I sort of leveraged that, and then I did my OPEX CCP. And then after that, I sort of felt comfortable enough to basically ask my coach at the time, Andy Edwards, who we've had on the podcast. I basically said to him like, hey, I want to start programming. Can I help you out? Do you guys need anyone to take on clients? Or because both of so it was Andy and it was a guy called Ollie Mansbridge who were running this sort of company called Perpetual Performance at the time. Both of them had affiliates. Both of them had a sort of a bit of a roster of a regionals athlete. And I picked up one client through them she was a masters athlete. And I remember I would like send her a program on Google spreadsheets, and then I would also send it off to Andy and Ollie as well. So they would have a look at it, and I would have basically, another 2 pair of eyes on the program, which was really quite useful. And we shared lots of sort of ideas. It wasn't necessarily anything super structured, but it was really quite helpful having their guidance at the start. And I also just sort of started to reach out to a couple of the younger, because I was only 24. So like, I remember just reaching out to the 2 of the sort of good athletes in Kuwait, who were younger than me, because I didn't really feel comfortable enough like asking people who are older than me. And I said, "Hey, do you guys want coaching?" And they were like, "Yeah, sure." And I remember it was just sort of like that. Then just I became known to do remote coaching and online coaching, and I worked in a number of other gyms as well over the years. So I then moved to like a personal training studio where people were already paying for personal training, and it was almost like people sort of wanted extra as well. So they didn't want to do 5 PT sessions a week. So I was like, okay. And then I started to use like Train Heroic, and I was sending people their programs on that. And then it was like sort of True Coach. And then just sort of, I had this, you could say this more like hybrid model where I was having a lot of in-person clients that were sort of doing remote coaching on the side as well. And then I was having some sort of competitors that I was working with. And then I moved back to the UK and I pretty much converted all of my personal training clients into remote coaching clients. And then when I was in the UK, I was working at a gym that sort of had, they basically ran the Mad Lab business system. So as a coach, I took care of like a group of membership. And I remember we was trying to sort of upsell these memberships, which included extra personal training. And I ended up just saying, I'm going to change the personal training for remote coaching. And I would input, their daily workout from the classes into True Coach. I would give them extra stuff to do as well. And then we would just interact online, looking over videos and everything like that. They would train in open gym. And then I moved, after being there for about 18 months, and I moved to Spain. And that for me was like almost, so that was nearly 4 years ago. But that for me was, because I didn't speak Spanish at the time, I was like, I need to make this remote coaching thing work. And I was lucky enough to convert some clients that I was working with. So mainly like a lot of the people I've worked with, I've worked in person to some degree. I suppose over the last couple of years, that's become less so because I don't like coach at an affiliate. But then also it's been helpful. I coached I coached Haja, who went to the games in 2019, and she was sort of the fittest QAT for a number of years. I think she's just is national champion again, and has qualified for semi-finals. We no longer work together, but like having her as a client was very helpful because a lot of people in and around her network were like, okay, well, I want coaching as well. So I think it's very helpful to have good clients who will talk about you, and and I suppose I was lucky as well working in the Middle East where people were a lot easier about spending money on that type of thing. Like I know that say in the UK and in the US and Europe, I mean in here in Spain, trying to get someone to pay more than €100 for a gym membership is quite difficult. So then trying to like get someone to do any remote coaching is like, that's just not going to happen, especially when you have like all of these sort of blog programs they can do. They're a lot cheaper. So it's been interesting sort of seeing how things have also developed with the pandemic as well, because I know that, a lot more coaches are now doing this, or they're now doing that form of like, you could say that hybrid of doing a bit of in-person and remote coaching. And I do think that is probably where a lot of people, I think a lot of people want to make the jump to say fully remote coaching, or they feel like that's the thing to do because they can just sort of throw their laptop up anywhere and just start getting on with work. But I do think that having like in-person clients to some level is really, really helpful. I found that I've actually had to go out and like I coach in a couple of different formats just to sort of keep my eye fresh as well, and just actually to have interaction and just to pick up on what people are actually thinking about with their training, because I think you can become a little bit disconnected. But it's like it's an interesting one. Definitely I definitely didn't envisage the sort of situation that I'm in currently. If like when I very, very first started remote coaching, but then that's, you know, like the whole industry and everything has completely sort of changed and shifted, and the world has sort of moved online. And now you're sort of you're seeing like quite a big push for moving the world offline as well now, and people like back into gyms and doing things that are social. And I've, you know, for example, a lot of the clients I've had through the sort of pandemic, they've lost their goals around competitiveness, and they've become more like, oh, I want to just, you know, look good naked or be healthy or climb up a mountain, and I want my trainer to do this. And I don't really want to snatch anymore because my shoulders hurt. And so they're just moving. I think the whole sort of landscape has shifted. Whereas, say, several years ago, probably when like regionals was still a thing, it was like everyone was just chomping at the bit to try and get to regionals. And it was, you know, like I was one of those people where it was like, okay, I remember like I qualified and then I tried to qualify again for so many years, but the competition just kept on getting harder and harder and harder, and I was just like, okay, this is crazy. But you know, like back then it was sort of still a dream that I think a lot of people had. So I remember, you know, a big proportion of my clients were like, I want to go to regionals, and that's my goal. Whereas like now it's probably shifted the other way around completely.
Yeah, Luke, that's actually a really interesting point, right? That, yeah, sort of like in that timeline of 8 years ago or so, it was realistic for someone who was like pretty good to be like, oh, maybe I want to go to regionals. Maybe I can like step up what I'm doing and actually make it next year. And that wasn't just like an insane thing, right? Whereas now if someone is like, oh yeah, I'm like pretty good at CrossFit, I think I want to go to semifinals next year. You're like, okay, I mean, I'm not going to tell you no, but let's look at the worst person at semifinals and what they can do. And like, let's look at where you are. Like, what is the gap here? You know, how do you anticipate closing that? But yeah, I mean, in that sort of like 2013, 2014, 2015 timeframe, it wasn't totally like a full-time life commitment to get to that level. And so people were looking for coaches to help them kind of close that gap, which I think is interesting. But yeah, I also think that in your story there, it's like you had the sort of combination of like getting your foot in the door with some competitive athletes, as well as like working just with personal training clients, and then kind of bridging the gap between like working in person and then like, okay, well, do you want some workouts to do on your own? Okay, I'm moving. We can continue to work together, but like maybe it'll look like this instead. Yeah,
like I think the moving several times has been sort of like helpful in that. I remember when I first started, I was like, oh, I want to coach, you know, really good athletes because I'm really into this. And like, but more and more with time, I've been like, I don't mind coaching a few people who are like really good, because you know, there's an intellectual curiosity that I have there, but I don't want to be that coach that sort of like, you know, sort of whispering in the ear of the athlete before they go onto stage and competition and all that type of thing. Because I'm like, that's a super stressful environment. It's not something that like I think a lot more of it is psychological, and it becomes a lot less about the sort of, you know, program design and that type of thing. I think I remember, who was it? I think it may have been Mike Lee when he was still with OPEX. I remember him saying like he's interested in the program that gets someone from like more of a like bubble level to like a really good level. And I remember him saying that, and I was like, yeah, that really makes sense, because I've worked with some athletes who are just very good, and it's just sometimes it's hard to even explain why they're good. It's just like throw more stuff at them, which can be quite jarring as a coach, because you want to try to dissect it and you want to try and make it legible, but it can be difficult. But yeah. Todd, tell us about you. Tell us about your coaching.
Yeah, totally. I think my start with remote coaching and program design is somewhat similar to both of you, right? I got started around the same time frame, actually a little bit earlier, because I was coaching at a gym in 2010. I started doing the programming for that gym, and Luke, sort of like you, I think I was relatively early in getting involved in some of the continuing education stuff, right? I did like a relatively early round of the OPEX CCP. I'd done some Poliquin courses, read a bunch of like Eric Cressy blog posts and all that stuff. So I had some knowledge about just like strength and conditioning as a whole. I read the secret Soviet training manuals, downloaded a bunch of PDFs of that stuff. So yeah, I mean, I had some knowledge about just like program design in general, outside of only doing CrossFit. And so, my thoughts around programming were, I mean, certainly at the time, like a little bit more sophisticated than just kind of like the do.com and go super hard, or just like do a ton of volume and hope you survive, which seemed to be like the dominant ways that people were training at the time. And so at least locally in Chicago, a few people were like, hey, will you actually write programming for me? And I hadn't even really considered that was a thing to do. I was like, yeah, I guess I'll do that. So I had a few local programming clients who, had just basically asked me to do it for them because they'd either been at the gym that I was coaching at, or, locally I did some workshops and seminars and things like that where I explained some thoughts around training. And so people, wanted help because they didn't necessarily know how to design training, and they were aware that there was potentially a better way to do it. And then similar to both of you, at the time, there weren't a ton of people offering coaching, and there weren't a ton of people, just like putting stuff out there that was helpful in that area. So you get a few of the competitive athletes locally who are, pretty good, like at the regionals level or at the regionals team level. And then the social status associated with that, other people are like, oh, well, I want to do what that person's doing. And you just kind of stumble into working with a handful of competitive athletes who are at least on the sort of like regional level pretty good. And then that kind of like kickstarts a wave of like the people who see them training, the people who train with them, the people who follow those people on Instagram. You start to get outreach from other people who also want coaching. So I think there's a lot of like right place at the right time in terms of getting clients without really being aware that was something that I was trying to do. And then right place and right time as far as having some understanding of like I said, like a slightly more sophisticated model of programming and like what's required for sport compared to just the sort of like Wild West of the CrossFit landscape at the time. So, I think that story isn't necessarily generalizable, right? Like both of you said, there's a ton of coaches now. There's a ton of people offering content. A lot of people have some knowledge about training now. So just being like the one-eyed man in the land of the blind is not really going to be the case for a lot of folks now who are trying to attract clients. But like John said, I was part of that grid team as well. And there's an element of like, if you're in person with people, and you are working with them, then you can potentially give them insight into what's going on that they just don't necessarily see themselves, right? And some of that comes from, in my case, owning a gym and having people in the facility, from coaching some athletes and sort of being present for that and being around other athletes who are want to train with those athletes or want to kind of like take it to the next level in their training. So for me, a lot of it was just like right place at the right time and get a certain amount of momentum going and kind of go from there.
Do you think, coming from kind of that OPEX background, as it were, do you think that kind of helped you mentally like frame your approach to coaching individuals and coaching remotely, as opposed to just the classic group class CrossFit model?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. John, similar to you, if I sort of go back and look at programs I was writing at the time, I'm sure there's tons of stuff where I'd be like, dude, what the hell were you doing? Like, that's not a good idea at all. But I think that the biggest thing that I found super, super valuable about the OPEX stuff, especially in that kind of like 2012, 2013-ish timeframe, is that I had done a lot of the reading. Like I had, read, read super training. Like I read the Soviet training manuals that Louis Simmons talked about. I read the various like Poliquin bodybuilding books. I read the Eric Cressy and Mike Robertson and Mike Boyle blog posts and all that stuff. And so you have some ideas about like, okay, there's like these strength and conditioning concepts that exist and are seemingly helpful. And then there's the just like CrossFit idea of, but honestly, I think the CrossFit Journal and all that stuff around that time was pretty good too, because you had Ripito, you had Greg Everett, you had all those people who were sort of like offering their Dave Tate, offering their 2 cents into the CrossFit methodology. But it was like, it's a lot of information and it's a little bit confusing. And I think that the thing that was really, really valuable about going through the OPEX CCP at that time is that it enabled you to like contextualize stuff, right? It's like, hey, we're sort of like focusing in this mixed modal CrossFit area, but we're actually using like strength and conditioning methods to think about it. And so, yeah, I was able to kind of like do the OPEX stuff and be like, oh, like this all makes a lot of sense, right? If you sort of think about some of this stuff from like an energy systems perspective, you can sort of see like what's happening and why people are doing certain things, right? If you think about like strength training for sport and then sort of like strength training as accessory for sport, like some of the other stuff makes sense. So that was for me extremely valuable, and I think like helped me take all the information that I had and like turn it into something useful.
I think when I did the CCP, I do remember it was just sort of like I went from basically coaching, like taking strength templates from like ebooks and things like that I had done or I was looking at and I sort of understood. And I would essentially just sort of do that typical train an athlete like a barbell athlete and then make them do conditioning as well and a bit of cardio or something like that. And I think what the energy system type stuff and just understanding how to like manage the overall stress that a CrossFit athlete goes through in their training was like a huge for when I did the OPEX course. And I remember like I knew I was just like piecing things together from this strength template and these random conditioning workouts. I knew I was doing that until I did the CCP. And then once I did the CCP, well, the program design, that was then when I was like comfortable enough to basically say to Andy and Ollie, being like, hey, can I program? Because I sort of understand what, like how to train for, strength endurance in a CrossFit setting or, train someone's aerobic system and all this other thing without it just being random workouts.
Yeah. And Luke, I think also at that time, it's sort of common knowledge now for the most part, but people didn't really think of CrossFit as an endurance sport, right? They thought that like you needed to get really strong and like have a really fast Fran time. And so if in 2013, you're like, hey, listen, like it's good to be strong and it's good to have a fast Fran time. But like what we're really dealing with here is like a muscle endurance sport and like a CP battery, like strength endurance sport, right? Where you need to be able to do like a super high volume of upper body contractions and then like repeatedly do 85 to 90% of your max on a power clean. And the way you do that isn't by like pushing your 1 rep max up and like getting better at like a 500 meter row time trial. That wasn't the way people were thinking about the sport at the time. So if you just sort of were like, hey, like think about it this way instead, that was mind blowing to people. And if you happen to be in the circles where people are talking about that at the time, you're like, oh wow, like paradigm shift. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I remember one moment actually quite, who was the guy in 2014 who was just like super strong? Was it like Jeff Martin or something like that? I think it was like from Florida.
Oh yeah, not Jeff Martin. I think that's the CrossFit Kids guy.
Evans?
Jeff Evans.
That's
right.
So I remember like he was either with Invictus or someone from OPEX, but I remember like someone saying that this, like this guy just he just like I remember the whole thing with like neuromuscular efficiency, which is like this guy is so powerful. He is just made he has to do 60 minutes of easy cardio every single day before he does any training. And it was like, for me, I was like, oh my God, like, what the fuck? That's just, and then I was sort of like drawing these parallels. I was like, Rich Froning in that YouTube video, like a day in the life of number 1 and 2, starts his day off every day with like a 4K row. And I was like, that's 20 minutes of zone 1. Oh my God. Oh yeah. And it was just like, so I was seeing all these things like come together when I was getting involved within that. And then I was like, yeah, okay. Yeah, this is, it's not just about how much you Olympic weightlift and if how many unbroken muscle ups you can do.
Totally. Cool. Well, so, we sort of gave our stories in this episode. It's not 2013 anymore, so probably not super helpful in terms of like actionable stuff for other folks. But in the next episodes in this series, we will maybe give some recommendations that hopefully we can give people some advice for getting involved in remote coaching that is transferable to the more modern fitness coaching ecosystem, and we'll go from there.